The auctioneer brought his gavel down, and the laughter started before the sound of it had finished. 23 boxes had gone before hers, each with a ribbon, each with a bidder. Hers had sat at the end of the auctioneer's table with no ribbon and no bids, until the man in the back of the hall raised his hand and said $2, and the hall of Garvey Creek made its opinion of this very clear. She stood up from her seat in the corner. She walked the full length of that hall, through the laughter, through the stares, through everything the room was saying without using words, and sat down across from him. She set the box on the table between them. "I suppose," she said, "we'd better eat." Before this story goes any further, if you have ever walked towards something when every voice in the room said to walk away, subscribe to this channel and stay with me through every word. Drop the name of your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Because that woman just walked through a room full of people who had already decided who she was, and she sat down anyway. And what happens after she sets that box on the table is the reason some of us still believe that being chosen by the right person is not a mistake. It is the beginning of something. His name was Boone Calder, and he had come down from the mountain that April evening for a reason he had not entirely admitted to himself. He was 47 years old and had been living alone on his property 12 miles north of Garvey Creek for 4 years, since his son Elias died of fever at 12 years old, and his wife Ida, who could not live beside a grief as large as his had become, had gone back east and dissolved their marriage through the territorial court. He did not blame her. He understood the way that some losses could not be shared. He had stayed on the mountain since, doing what he knew how to do, coming to town once a month for supplies and going back. 4 years of this. He had been trying, with partial success, to locate the part of himself that could imagine doing otherwise. He had first seen Hannah Creel in January. It was the 15th, in 14 inches of new snow, when a man named Cole Pryor came riding hard into Garvey Creek, saying his wife had been laboring since the night before, and something was wrong. The doctor was in Billings. There was no one else. Except there was. The Creel woman, the large one, the one whose mother had been the closest thing this valley had to a healer before she died of a lung complaint 18 months prior. Hannah Creel had come out of her house with her bag, assessed the snow, and said, "Where?" Her horse was lame. The Pryor place was 14 miles. Boone had been at the livery and heard the conversation. He handed her his reins without being asked. She took them with a nod, as though being given a horse by a stranger in a blizzard was simply what happened next. Because what happened next was what mattered. She rode off into the white. He walked the 14 miles back to his property through the snow and thought about her the entire way, not with any feeling he had a name for. He did not name feelings he wasn't sure he could afford. He thought about the way she had not hesitated, the way she had moved toward something everyone else was moving away from, as though the distance between knowing what needed doing and doing it was not a question she experienced as a question. He had thought about this for 4 months before he came to the box social. Her name was Hannah Creel, and she had been in Garvey Creek for 2 years. She had come with her mother, who was a herbalist and healer, and her mother had died before the first winter was out, and Hannah had stayed because she knew how to do what her mother had done, and the valley needed it done. She had delivered 13 babies in 2 years, attended to 17 cases of fever, set 5 broken bones, and treated a number of the quiet ongoing ailments that people did not bother the doctor in Billings for. She charged nothing. She took what was offered. She had never been invited to a supper in 2 years of Garvey Creek, and she had brought her box to the social at the school teacher's specific request, which was why it sat at the end of the table with no ribbon and no bidder. She was not a small woman. She had been large her whole life, in the way of women who have done physical work from girlhood and whose bodies reflect this honestly. And she had been walking through the world's opinion of her size for 30 years, with the particular efficiency of someone who knows the route and has stopped expecting it to shorten. In Garvey Creek, she was known as two things simultaneously: indispensable in the dark, inconvenient in the light. They sent for her when the baby wouldn't come right. They looked through her in the street. She had not expected anyone to bid $2 on an unribboned box. It was not what she'd expected. Men who made public gestures toward women who hadn't asked for public gestures were usually proving something, to themselves, to the room, to a principle they'd decided to hold that evening and would set down in the morning. This man looked as though the opinion of everyone in the hall had not entered his consideration at any point in the process. "You're the one who gave me the horse in January," she said. "That's right. I never learned your name." Boone called her. She opened the box and divided the contents with the practicality of someone who had packed 2 portions and intended for both to be eaten. He ate without ceremony. Whatever he thought of the food, he did not say. But she watched him work through it at the pace of a man who was not doing it out of obligation. "You bid $2, she said, when nobody else bid anything. "I noticed," he said. He finished what was in front of him. "Is there more?" She gave him more. He ate that too. They talked, not with the practiced ease of people who were good at social performance, but with the directness of 2 people who had both found honesty more efficient than its alternatives. She asked him about the mountain. He described it in spare terms. She told him, without complaint, what 2 years in Garvey Creek had been like for her. They were in the middle of this when the boy began to choke. He was 7 years old, a child named Asa, who had been allowed too much hard candy at the table beside them, and the sound he made was not loud, but it was specific. And Hannah was out of her chair before Boone had fully registered what he'd heard. She crossed the 4 feet between them, turned the boy firmly, administered the sharp upward pressure between his shoulder blades that her mother had demonstrated on her 100 times, and the candy struck the floor. 45 seconds. The boy's face went from blue to red to pink, to frightened to embarrassed. His mother dissolved into tears. Hannah spoke to both of them quietly, checked the boy's breathing with practiced hands, and came back to her seat. The hall went back to its conversations. "Where did you learn that?" Boone asked. "My mother," she said. She straightened the cloth on the table. She showed me everything she knew. He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't hesitate. It needed doing," she said. She looked at him. "I'd give you the same answer about January if you were going to ask." He considered this. "You went because you know how. If you know how," she said, "and you don't go, then what you know is worth nothing." He sat with that. He thought about it all 12 miles home through the April dark. Not about the food, though the food had been the best meal he'd eaten in 4 years. Not about the laughter, which had been what it was. He thought about 7 words that it contained, in his estimation, a complete philosophy of a life. He had been looking for something like it without knowing he was looking. That was what made the night wonderful for him. He came back to Garvey Creek 11 days later with no particular errand that he could have described to anyone who asked. He went to the dry goods store first, which gave him a reason to be in town. Then he walked to her house, which gave him a reason to knock. She opened the door and did not quite conceal her recognition of what his being there represented. "Boone called her," she said. "I was in town," he said. "I know," she said. "I saw you at the dry goods store." She stepped back. "Come in if you want." She was working. Bundles of dried herbs on the table, small glass jars, a mortar. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and something deeper underneath it, something medicinal and clean. A 7-year-old girl named Nell was at the corner of the table, the widow Marcia's youngest, who had been coming to Hannah's house every few days since her fever broke in November, and who had apparently decided Hannah's kitchen was the most interesting place available to her. Nell looked at Boone. She looked at him for approximately 3 seconds. Then she relocated to the chair beside him with the uncomplicated directness of a child who had not yet learned to be careful about who she trusted. "Are you the mountain man?" she asked. "I live on the mountain," he said. "Hannah talks about you," Nell said. Hannah set down her pestle. "Nell, she didn't say anything bad," Nell said, with the helpfulness of a child who saw no reason for vagueness. He stayed for the better part of an hour. Hannah cooked while she talked. Not elaborate cooking. Practical cooking. The venison broth with dried rosehip and foraged herbs that she had learned from her mother and made when the materials were available. The smell of it filled the small kitchen before the half-hour was up. Something warm and particular. The smell of a kitchen that used everything it had and wasted nothing. She set a bowl in front of him without asking what he thought of it, and he ate it, and a second bowl, and Nell ate hers with both feet swinging under the chair, and outside the Garvey Creek afternoon went on without them. He came back 8 days after that, and 6 days after that. On the 6th visit, he arrived to find Hannah working from a book he hadn't seen before. A thick cloth-covered ledger, old, its pages soft with handling. He picked it up from the shelf the way he picked up most things, directly, because he was interested in it. "My mother's," Hannah said, without looking up from what she was doing. He turned the pages. It was a herbarium, pressed plants, labeled in a careful hand, with notes beside each one detailing uses, preparations, dosages, what to watch for. The handwriting was similar to Hannah's but smaller. She started it when she was 18, Hannah said. She kept it until she died. I've been adding to it since. He looked at the page he was on, a pressed sprig of something he didn't know the name of, and beside it 4 lines of Hannah's own handwriting, denser, more detailed. The notes of someone who had gone further into the subject than her teacher had. "You're not just using what she taught you," he said. "She gave me somewhere to start," Hannah said. She finally looked up. "I've been going my own direction since." He set the book back on the shelf with the care of someone who understood he'd been holding something important. That was when something shifted, in the way she looked at him when she thought he wouldn't notice. He noticed. He said nothing about it. On the 14th visit, Nell had gone home and the herbs were put away, and the evening light lay long across the floor. Boone was quiet for a while, in the way he was quiet when he was working through something. "I had a son," he said. She didn't say she was sorry. She waited. Elias, 12 years old. He died of fever 3 years ago. He looked at his hands. "My wife went east after. I understand why. We were different kinds of grieving, and I don't think either kind left much room for the other." He stopped. "I've been on the mountain since." She set her cup down. She sat. She stayed. She did not resolve it or minimize it. She understood that what a person offered when they finally decided to offer it required receiving fully, and she sat with him in the quiet of her kitchen for a long time, and neither of them spoke, and it was enough. 3 days later, Dr. Franklin Huxley filed his complaint with the county. He had arrived in Garvey Creek 6 weeks prior from Laramie with his credentials and a firm belief that the territory required proper medicine rather than the herbal work performed by untrained women. He had communicated this belief to Hannah directly. In the street, 8 days after his arrival, she was to refer any cases within a reasonable doctor's purview to him, which in his view was all of them. She had listened and continued as she had been. The complaint, when it arrived in writing, alleged unlicensed practice of medicine, specifically that she had attended his wife without his authorization and administered a treatment that contradicted his own instructions. Mrs. Huxley had sent for Hannah herself on a Tuesday, when something in her 5th month of pregnancy had not responded to her husband's care. Hannah had gone, spent 40 minutes, and addressed what needed addressing. Huxley had been on the porch when she came out. He said several things. She listened. She walked home. On a Thursday, she read the formal complaint. She stood in her kitchen holding the paper for a while after she finished. Not reading it again, she had understood it the first time. Standing with it, letting the weight of what it meant sit on her. 2 years of Garvey Creek. Every cold night she'd walked out carrying her bag. Everything her mother had given her and everything she'd added to it since. She set the paper on the table. She sat down on the kitchen floor and stayed there for 2 minutes. Then, she got up. She washed her face. She went to see the widow Marsh's youngest, who had a cough she was monitoring. Boone came the following morning. He sat across from her and looked at the complaint on the table, which she had not moved. "Tell me what he's saying," he said. She told him. The license question. The specific incident. What it would mean if the county upheld it. "What happens if they rule against you?" he asked. "I stopped practicing," she said. Her voice was level. "Which means I stopped being useful in any way that this valley has ever needed me to be." He looked at the herbarium on the shelf. "I'd like to go to the hearing," he said. She said he didn't have to. "I gave you my horse in January," he said, "because I watched you go toward something when everyone else was standing still. And that is not a small thing, and I have been paying attention to it ever since." He put his hat on the table. "I'll be at the hearing." The county clerk's office in Garvey Creek held 37 people on a Wednesday morning in May, which was more than it was built to hold. Hannah walked in without adjusting her pace, the way she walked through everything, and took her seat. Dr. Huxley's lawyer presented the case cleanly. The license question, its statutory foundation, the specific incident. He was prepared and thorough. He spoke for 14 minutes. Then the county clerk asked whether anyone wished to speak to Hannah Creel's practice in the valley. The widow Marsh stood first. She spoke about the November fever, 4 days unbroken, and what Hannah had done about it. She said her daughter was alive. Cole Pryor stood. He did not speak much. He was holding his 4-month-old son. He held the boy up, briefly, so the room could see him, and sat back down. A farmer named Weston spoke about the broken arm Hannah had set in December, clean and straight, that let him work through spring planting without trouble. A woman in the back spoke about a difficult birth 2 years prior, the first winter Hannah was in the valley, that Hannah had attended alone in a 3-day snowstorm. Person after person. Huxley's lawyer objected twice. The clerk overruled him twice. Then Boone stood. He said, "I want this room to understand what Hannah Creel did on the 15th of January of this year." He said it plainly and completely. The ride into town, the 14 inches of snow, the lame horse, the 14 miles. He said she was going to walk it. "I gave her my horse because a horse was faster, but she was going either way." He looked at the room, at the people who had laughed at the box social 6 weeks ago, at the people who had sent for her in the dark and looked through her in the light. "This county has a doctor now," he said. "That is a good thing. A doctor in Laramie on the 15th of January is not the same as Hannah Creel in Garvey Creek on the 15th of January. This room knows the difference. I'd like the county to know it too. He sat down. The clerk looked at his papers for a long moment. He looked at the room. He looked at Huxley's lawyer. The practice of traditional herbal medicine and midwifery has operated in this territory without specific licensing since before its organization, he said, and no current statute requires such licensing for these forms of care. The complaint identifies no specific harm arising from Miss Creel's practice. The complaint is dismissed. Outside, in the afternoon light, Hannah stood on the steps and did not quite know what to do with what had just happened. The same people who had laughed at the box social had spent an hour in that room, testifying to what she was worth. They had not done it graciously or with any acknowledgement of what they had done and not done in the 2 years before. They had simply done it, because in the end people knew what they knew. Boone came out and stood beside her. "You didn't have to say what you said," she told him. "I said what was true," he said. "That's a different thing." They walked back through Garvey Creek in the long May evening, and neither of them spoke for a while, which was comfortable in the way that silences became comfortable between people who had been in each other's company enough times. "You've been to town 11 times in the past 3 months, she said. He glanced at her. "You counted." "I count things," she said. "It's a professional habit." Something in her voice was not quite dry, but was adjacent to it. "You had no reason to be in Garvey Creek 11 times. "I had a reason," he said. "Which was?" They walked. "I gave you my horse in January," he said, "and I walked back through the snow thinking about what you'd done and why, and I thought about it for 4 months. And when the box social came, I came down from the mountain and bid on a box with no ribbon because I had been thinking about the woman who walked toward something when everyone else was going the other direction, and I wanted to sit across the table from her long enough to find out if I was right about what I'd seen." "Were you?" she said. "Right?" "Yes," he said, "and I've been coming back to keep finding out." She was quiet for a moment. "I wondered when you'd say something," she said. "I wanted to be sure first." "And are you?" He looked at her, with the full, specific attention she had learned to recognize over 11 visits, the attention of a man who saw particular things and did not look away from them. "Yes," he said. "I'm sure." At her door she unlocked it and held it open. "I'll make tea," she said. He came in. He sat at the table where he had sat 11 times before, and this time neither of them pretended he was there for any reason other than the actual one. Nell would tell anyone who asked, with complete satisfaction, that she had known from the beginning. She was 7 years old and had known from the first afternoon and had been waiting for the rest of them to arrive at the same conclusion. Hannah Creel had been in Garvey Creek for 2 years before anyone in it thought to see her. Not as a pair of hands to send for in emergencies, not as an oddity, not as a problem the town had not yet decided how to solve, but as herself. It had taken a mountain man with no social strategy and $2, and the willingness to walk 14 miles home in the dark, having given away his horse. That night had been wonderful for him. She had not known it at the time. She had been finding out, in the weeks since, that it had been the beginning of something for her as well. She had been the kind of person worth the looking for a long time before anyone looked. The looking had finally caught up with her.